destination. Darkness is quite near your feet and sunsets through your ears. And tide is rising, drought is non-existent. Sins are washed away, all the faults that you were facing. Sunset chaser, where's your new location? Searching for a purpose, the truth is making you nervous. And sunlight's waiting, there's a happy ending. Picture perfect skies, does your life have any meaning? Oh darling, don't you cry no more, as the sun will soon shine 1,000 times. Don't you worry, dear, dark clouds will soon clear for you. Daylight saver till the next adventure. Love is all around, but you're focused on your frowning. Rays are burning, a chemiluminescence, feeling through the gloom, tense and patient for its blooming. Oh darling, don't you cry no more, as the sun will soon shine 1,000 times. Don't you worry, dear, dark clouds will soon clear for you.
Sunny, see, there's no point of being me, as the night took my innocence. I'm starting to see there's no mention of happiness. Life I possess, I offer it to you as you banish regret. In my heart, tape mouth, I can't hardly speak. Tracks of my tears slipped away, I am weak. As I sing this last melody, you set your own rest. Sunny, song is my final request.
Oh darling, don't you cry no more, as the sun will soon shine 1,000 times. Don't you worry, dear, dark clouds will soon clear for you.
Aloha kakau. I'm Becky, the Executive Director here at HIF. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you here to our panel today. Before we begin, on behalf of HIF, I respectfully offer up this land acknowledgement, acknowledging Hawaii as an Indigenous space whose original people are today identified as Kanaka Maoli. This acknowledgement honors the land we stand on and guides the way in which we speak and act. I ask all those present to reflect and honor the Indigenous people, traditional stewards of the land for generations upon generations. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today to this HIF panel co-presented with Nia Taro on kin theory. This is a part of HIF's Indigenous Lens program at our 41st annual Hawaii International Film Festival presented by Holly Kalani. I highly, highly encourage you to view all of the films we have available as part of our Indigenous Lens showcase on our website and our streaming app at watch.hif.org. We have over 200 films available there, 86% of which are available nationwide. So we could not be more proud and excited to be showcasing this new program as part of HIF, and grateful for the support of Nia Taro in making it possible for us to do that. We have a lot of other films as well present running through the end of the month. We go all the way through November 28th with our online platform, so please be sure to check us out. Without further ado, I'm happy and honored to introduce Tracy Rector as our moderator today. Tracy is a filmmaker, curator, community organizer, and programmer. She is the managing director of storytelling at Nia Taro, which is developing the Kin Theory, a database for Indigenous media creatives. She has directed and produced over 400 shorts and other films and is in production on her 6th feature documentary, Out of the Muck, which is supported by ITVS. As an impact producer, she served on the team for the Emmy Award-winning feature documentary Dawnland, which premiered on Independent Lens's 2018 season to 2.1 million viewers in its opening week. Her work has also been featured in National Geographic, Imagine Native Film and Media Arts Festival, Cannes, Toronto, and the Smithsonian's Museum of the American Indian. She's also the co-founder of Longhouse Media, which was a nonprofit focused on galvanizing Indigenous and local communities through film production. From 2005 to 2021, she worked with over 50 tribal nations and helped train 3,000 young people. And finally, she's the mother of 2 wonderful young adults. Without further ado, Tracy.
Thank you. That was such a kind introduction. I appreciate being in this space with you all, and just want to say thank you again for the very warm welcoming and aloha. And also, Becky, want to say thank you to the rest of your team for being such a great host and partner in creating this event. It's important for me to share that I'm here representing Nia Taro, a global nonprofit based in Seattle that uplifts Indigenous peoples in their land stewardship through policy and storytelling. This event is part of our series of events being produced through the Kin Theory team at Nia Taro, who are developing an Indigenous media makers database to foster a global community of creators who can connect, share resources, and collaborate. Our circle of friends and co-conspirators in this work continues to grow as the Kin Theory project grows, and we really appreciate the relationship HIF and Nia Taro have enjoyed deepening over the past few years. This year, I'm so happy to have a chance to bring in Dakota, Chad, Alyssa, and Tomas, all of whom have been part of the Nia Taro Storytelling and Journalism Fellowships, and whose work I truly admire. I can spend the next hour just sharing how much love I have for these humans that we're about to be in conversation with. But I do want to also begin our talk here today. And with that, I'd like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves by sharing their pronouns, their identities, where they're joining from, as well as a description of how they are representing on screen for accessibilities. And I'll go first. My name is Tracy Rector. I'm the Managing Director of Storytelling at Nia Taro. I identify as a mixed race woman and mother and partner. I present with medium brown skin. I have long darkish hair. The top part is getting silver. And I have a black shirt on, and I'm sitting in my living room, and I'm wearing glasses. I'm calling in from the traditional homelands of the Puyallup peoples, and I use she, her pronouns. And with that, I'd like to invite Tomas in.
Hafaday, good morning from Saipan in the Northern Mariana Islands. My name is Tomas Manglona. I'm an Indigenous Chamorro from the Northern Mariana Islands, originally from the island of Rota. I'm a digital producer and regional correspondent for KUAM News, and also recently completed my thesis film in my graduate program called Pacific Islanders Transforming Higher Education. The Ocean is the School. And I'm wearing a green polo. I have black hair, and I'm sitting in my room with a tan and white background. And I use they, them, and he, him pronouns.
Thank you, Tomas. Dakota, may we ask you to introduce yourself?
Oi, Hafaday, see Dakota. What's the people who look after each other? I'm Dakota. I'm a mapped out Chamorro person with roots here in Guahan, but also in Saipan. And that's probably way back though, not as close as you, Tomas. And I'm here in Guahan, in the land of the Chamorro, in Laguas, on our archipelago. And I use Gridza and Zotnia as my pronouns, which are their language, and they're also gender neutral, which is quite why I love them. And I'm having internet issues today, which is so fun when you have to do a live event. So if there was anything else that we were meant to say, I don't know what it is, but I'm glad to be here and really honored to be in this space.
Thank you, Dakota.
Visual description?
Yes.
I've got long black hair that's tied up in a top knot, and I've got brown skin, and I'm sitting on a couch. You can see just the bottom of a painting, and I'm wearing a sanahi, which is like a crescent-shaped white clamshell necklace, and a gatsai, which is a tool in the shape of a triangular thing.
Thank you, Dakota. Alyssa, may I invite you in?
I'm gonna sheesh. Thank you. Chinget ayachat yachya diadi yuchat duasauch chach nahatsiti dakloedi ayachat and gunkwan ayachat. I just provided my Tlingit introduction. My Tlingit name is Yachya Diadi, which means valuable child. My Western name is Alyssa London. I am Eagle Killer Whale, and my family's from the Killer Whale Chasing Seal House in Angoon, Alaska. I'm calling in from the traditional homelands of the Dena'ina, Clutina, Athabascan people in Anchorage, Alaska. It's currently -8 degrees outside right now. So my skin currently is very light, like my Czech and Norwegian mother. When I am in warm climates, I have more golden skin, like my Tlingit father. I go by she, her pronouns. I am the founder, producer, writer, and author of Culture Story, which is about showcasing the vitality of Indigenous culture and navigating the question of who are you and where you come from, which is all about facilitating conversations about identity. So it's a media and production company that is my passion and my heart. I'm wearing a black shirt. I'm calling in from a conference room in the co-working office space that I work out of. Let's see, what else was I to share? I have I guess auburn long hair. And Tracy, is there anything else you would like me to share?
That's just perfect. Thank you. And over to you, Chad.
Hello, everybody. I'm Chad Charlie. I am from Ahousaht First Nation, which is on the west coast of Vancouver Island, which is on the west coast of Canada. Usually that's like hard to describe to people who don't know where any of that is. Yeah, I'm Afro-Indigenous, so I'm Black and Native, and I am calling in from Duwamish territory, which is Seattle, and yeah, I am currently I'm a writer and a director. I'm working on a few projects right now. One of which being Reservation Dogs, which is pretty cool. Um, and let's see. I am in a white room with books behind me and pictures. I don't know which way to point. That's my kids. There's a board of cool stuff. And then, yeah, I have an afro that is pulled back and wearing a blue shirt.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you, everyone. So let's get into some of our questions. The first one is really about the seeds of storytelling. You each, as Indigenous storytellers, have distinct but also related paths, I would say. And you all collectively and individually have an impressive list of projects and awards and accomplishments in terms of both in art and in community. I'm really excited, and I know others would love to hear kind of what's your main inspiration for your work? What got you onto this path? And whomever would like to jump in first, or I can also call someone out.
My father and my grandfather are my biggest inspirations for Indigenous storytelling because they made it very clear to me from a young age that we are part of a rich history and that it is part of my responsibility to not only make others in our community feel proud of who we are and where we come from, but to also to be an ambassador and share with others about our culture and our nation. And I have always felt that storytelling and media was one of the best ways to do that. And I also think that it's a great medium for conveying some of the things that the English language doesn't lend itself when it comes to Indigenous storytelling, because there's ways that we can visually convey things to the public to help them understand and feel more of our culture that there otherwise can't be said just by speaking it.
Thank you. Tomas, I'm curious, what are the seeds of your storytelling inspiration?
Yeah, and so most of my work has been TV or video journalism, and how I got into that process was because, like I said, where I'm from in the island of Rota, which is just has about 2,000 people living there, and so even a much smaller community than where I'm at now on the island of Saipan. But I grew up without, and to this day, there remains no reporter who lives there, or newspaper that's printed there, or news station that produces there. And so I grew up with the urgency of wanting my community to have the information they need. But more than that, also wanting to see them represented. Oftentimes, I'd see stories about the archipelago that left out the smaller islands, left out the smaller, quote unquote, smaller communities. And in a community that is already seen as small, or as some might see as specks in the Pacific, we know that we're not that, and that we do in fact come from one of the largest bodies of water on Earth. And so as I grew up, I wanted to be part of the meaning making of what it means to come from this land. And I found my way back home after pursuing my education in California for 5 years, to not only work here in the Northern Marianas where I'm at, but also work on Guam, which is all part of the same archipelago. And so to me, coming back and wanting to continue to expand that meaning making, to talk about and represent not only just my home island, but show how we're all interconnected throughout the region here in Micronesia especially.
Thank you. I just heard a phrase last week at COP. It was called, I think, large ocean nations. Is that right?
Yes, and a lot of people are starting to also call it a blue continent. So uh, as we continue to fight for this visibility representation, it's definitely something that we're emphasizing because uh, as Chad was just mentioning, it's sometimes hard to explain where you come from, and for those who might not have who live outside of the who might not have ever lived outside of the U.S. Continental U.S. Um, explaining that can be especially harder.
Thank you. Chad, how about you? What's inspired your path?
Oh, my community from like the smaller communities being, in a house it, just being able to like be inspired by the rich culture um, has guided me to a path of storytelling. It's guided me to a path of just being an entertainer. I started working as a stand-up comedian, I think like 13 years ago now, and then that kind of just slowly developed me into filmmaking over time. And I feel like I've always set goals for myself based on what I would like to see for my community. And starting with film, it was I wanted to create something in my language, which I've never seen. And I don't see anybody else trying to do it. So I'm like, let me do that. And ever since I got into film, it's always been like all of my projects are geared towards the same goal of trying to be able to create something or give opportunity or just tell stories for my community and from my community.
Thank you, Chad. As uh, someone who's mixed race and also identifies as Afro-Indigenous heritage, how do you hold multiple communities as part of your creative process?
Um, let's see. I don't like it's hard to describe because like I feel like with answers like that or questions like that, people would expect me to say something like, "Well, on this part of the day, I'm representing my black side. On this side of the day, I'm representing my native side." Which in all reality, my life is both. My life is both. I can walk like I could walk in the hood and still be native. You know what I mean? So like regardless of where I come from and who I come from, like being able to say that I'm black and indigenous isn't like, I don't know, like it's not black and white for me. It's just straight up like these are my communities, and I'm like, regardless of the time of day or what I'm doing, um I did like I just represent both, and I want to be able to show that in the work that I do. So if it has to do with a project that's like I don't here's the thing is like I feel like I have a thing about like being, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm just I just represent black and indigenous everywhere I go. And if people don't like it, I'm still gonna do it. Um,
Yeah, it's all interwoven, and what you do is what you do, and expression,
Tracy,
your lived
can I?
experience. Hmm. Yeah, please do.
I am mixed race, uh, Tlingit, and then Czech and Norwegian on my mother's side. I wrote a children's book called Journey of the Freckled Indian because I'm finding that, at least up in Alaska, given so much of the Alaska Native community is mixed race, and so much of our community, I guess, benefits are tied to blood quantum, that having to define your identity as a mixed race person and still claim your indigenous heritage is becoming a matter of even politics up here. And people will, even within your community, because that has resources tied to it. There has even been some people that will challenge like how native you are, and so it's become part of my work to help people claim all aspects, or at least facilitate conversations about claiming all aspects of who you are and where you come from and your heritage, because that's really, at least up here, the future of indigenous culture is, no matter how mixed race you become, that you still honor that part of you. And so I just wanted to state that because it's important for the future of our culture up here.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And what's the name of your book called again?
Journey of the Freckled Indian, a Tlingit culture story. My Tlingit grandfather would call, when he was alive, all of his grandchildren his freckled Indians because we were all mixed race, but he did certain things throughout our lifetimes to make sure we were proud of our Tlingit heritage, because he didn't want to see any of that go away as the generations pass, because he'd remind us how much he and his mother and his grandmother, all they had to go through for us to even be able to claim our, or be part of the Tlingit nation. So
Thank
so,
you.
mhm,
I'll look that up after this.
thank
So,
you.
yeah. So Dakota, the question was really about what inspires the path that you're on, your media creative path. And we would love to hear from your perspective how you've come to this point in your career. How you're
Yeah,
inspired.
thanks so much for the question.
Yeah.
I started dancing in my family's cultural dance group when I was 3 years old. It was the early 90s, and it was in Swinomish and Shredad territory, which is momentarily known as Oak Harbor. And that is where I experienced how our stories, our family stories, and the stories of our people are encoded in our song and dance. And in the 8th grade, I learned about colonization from this amazing teacher. He's a Jewish man named Mr. Janello, um, who warned us not to touch our history books because they're dangerous. And then he passed us out the first chapter of People's History of the United States. And I realized that, hey, those Catholic people were hurting, the Arawak. Like, that's messed up, man, because I'm Catholic. And, I don't want to hurt anybody. And then I realized that, oh, my people were the Arawak of where the Spanish landed. And when that kind of came to fore, I started to write poetry. I was really inspired by this art form called Cantan Rita. Um, and I started building with a group from the south end of Seattle, which is where I eventually ended up moving. I met this group called Abyssinian Creole. So this man named Theodros in Kalakiano goes by Kings. And they really brought me into to the South End and to the hip hop community, to the Black community, and I feel like in Seattle there's a long history of intercultural solidarity work. 98118 was the most diverse code in the nation I was growing up, and yeah, so that was the place where I kind of learned and embodied and had a really deep appreciation for how the cultural work of our communities is the place storytelling happens, is the place where we tell each other what's going on in our lives. Gabriel often talks about healing in public, and that's what storytelling became for me too. It was a way for me to process how these histories of colonization. Some of my first hip hop songs were, making the connection between gentrification of our neighborhoods and the colonization of our villages. And there's a lot more of the story, but eventually I went to college and I did a study abroad, which is my first trip back home here. And I learned a traditional style form of chant through this group called Ifalayan, and I started to learn my language again. And that really shifted the way that I saw things. And then I got into contemporary Indigenous dance, and kind of all of these different mediums that have been informing me. I'm really deeply inspired by the type of cultural work that our communities do that involve bringing our people together to tell our stories even in improvisatory ways. I really enjoy like the feeling and the vibration of like you never know what could happen, and what gets evoked in you when you see somebody that's so talented, that's so skilled with language, whether it be their indigenous language or English or a mix or you know, there's many different kinds of English too. It's just there's something that happens vibrationally that can change someone. I think it has to do with creating opportunities for people to experience being in the flow of creation. And that's kind of where my artwork, my heart work, as Stephanie Hazelrig, one of my mentors from the South End, talks about, is creating space for us to do that together. Um, you know, so that's I feel like that's how I want to answer the question today. Thank you so much for that beautiful question.
Thank you. And thank you for reminding us how artwork or heart work is connected to these bigger conversations as well, whether it be identity, intercultural solidarity work, connection to environment. They're not separate. They're definitely interconnected, but they're the expression of one's creative potential and ideas and visions is also a spiritual journey. And I'm very curious to hear from all of you about the transformations that you are seeing within yourself and within the industry around you at this time.
Yeah, that's a hard question, Tracy.
That's what I'm here for, I guess.
That's why we're here, to talk about it. I've been thinking about this a lot too, because constantly I think, especially as someone who is much younger and just entering this field outside of, an educational institution as well. Even though, I started reporting since I was in the, the 6th grade. And so in some ways it feels like a long time, but it really isn't. I constantly think about the ways in which we frame stories, no matter what medium you're in, whether or not the pacing, the layering, the editing itself is also a choice. Is very much a choice, and very much has its own meanings and consequences. Really, I think about when I was working on my first documentary, what the topography of that would look like, and how maybe that would match a more Indigenous Pacific Islander epistemology about how the way we live our lives is should also be reflected in the ways that the mediums, subtract or add to our representations. And so it's a constant struggle. I've had the chance now. I'm in a place now where I can work on both long form and short form, while getting paid for it, thankfully. And I'm constantly interrogating my process in terms of all of those editorial decisions that really start from the beginning of any narrative, at least I think for me. We often think about the characters we include, the different arcs in that story, but also ultimately, how do our decisions, whether or not it's narrated or not by us, with a voiceover or with whatever other narrative tools you might use, that when we really do come into these communities, our communities, when we represent them through our mediums, what does our choices mean? I'm constantly going back and forth, especially in terms of pacing and both literal and figurative framing, because what does it mean to be recognized or to have your work shared because it was quote unquote good for hitting some particular marks that have traditionally been known to be quality? And with our mission to maybe bring stories that haven't been in the mainstream to the center, are we in some ways also maybe reproducing that, but in just a different color or in a different story? And so those are just some of the struggles that I want to consciously bring into my work and question myself whenever, if it's a short form story or a long form story, how pacing, cuts, and all of that come together to ultimately for us to paint our own picture, right?
Love that beautiful reflection and interrogation on how we've been fed narratives, and in this moment, changing that into the narratives that need to come forward.
Yeah. I love this question, Tracy. I love this question. I've been so I talked about Canton Samarita being an art form idea that I fell in love with. When I was a kid, I didn't have any practitioners around me who could teach me how to practice it, and I didn't speak our language more than a few words at that point. And couple of years ago, I started on this journey. Some of it was, I work in contemporary Indigenous dance, and I was thinking a lot about how do Chamorros dance? What is a Chamorro way to make dance? And if you know anything about our cultural movement, um, you might find out that within the Chamorro community and in the kind of broader Pasifika community, there can be contention around our cultural movement. And I'm really familiar with this. Like I said, my family had a group in the 90s, and I've kind of been working through those complications, just thinking about how culture gets exchanged, and what happens in the moment when people exchange parts of culture and then take that on as part of themselves. And I've been looking at that journey internally also because I grew up Giselagu on the continent, and was touched by many different communities, in particular by people, by Black culture. And so I started to engage with Black culture as someone who would write hip hop songs. And as I started to think about what it means for me as a non-Black Indigenous person, to be making dance, to be making music, and really wanting to understand like what are the ethics here, and I started to question how it is for me as a non-Black person to practice to practice an art form that is not of my ancestral lineage. And this kind of opened up this whole other kind of set of questions. And I came back to Cantan Samarita, and the reason why is because that art form is what brought me in relationship to hip hop. Because that art form is about rhyming, it's about improvisation, it's about wordplay, it's about rhythm, it's about community coming together, it's about oral history, it's about being able to outwit somebody, it's about being able to flirt. Um, and as I started to explore that art form, a lot of emotional work has been coming up because I've had to confront these kind of almost seemingly subtle ways that I internalize anti-Black racism. And then even on a level that is what is kind of like I'm still deepening to understand, but it's also bringing up these ways that oppression has made it so that my family couldn't show up for me in the way that I wanted them to. So these like wounds of childhood, of um, just not getting the love that I wanted, and not getting the love. Like today, I went to the jungle with my friend Hilan, and I just was crying because I didn't get to grow up seeing these colors and feeling the texture of the lumot and hearing the sounds of the birds, and that's not my family's fault, but there's this like deep grief that I'm processing internally. And it's a grief that I'm familiar with because when I go to my ancestral village of Home, which is all tells now, and I see what's happened to that place, it makes me mad. And so I was there the other day too, and I decided to sing Cantan Temerita to myself. And yeah, so for me, this kind of internal transformation that's happening, it's like a combination of it's just asking these like questions about my purpose in life, what is ethical, and I was really inspired by Natalie Ball said this thing about, if you're part of the land back movement, the most powerful thing you can do to get your land back is to be on your land as a Native person. Um, so I'm processing all of that, and then at the wide systemic level, I'm slowly seeing some people start to get a picture of something. And it's irritating because it's just like, literally just give us the money and get out of our communities. Organize your people to end racism and end colonization. That's what you all need to do. And we're gonna do what we've always done and what we will always do. So they move a little bit slow for my taste.
Thank you, Dakota. You always have such powerful insight and words to share, and I'll be thinking about what you've said for a while. I know. Chad, over the last few years, I've witnessed your journey. It's been incredible. And I might even say, in relationship to this question, transformative. If you're up for sharing the transformations that you are part of and witnessing, that would be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely been quite a journey over the last certain amount of years, I guess, like probably like 5 years ago. Um, so when I was doing stand-up comedy, everything was, everything um, seemed great until you hit this like, me personally, I hit a depression, and that came from my grandfather's passing. And from there, like, I just decided that everything, like, I needed change in my life. And then I went to Standing Rock, and then from like in Standing Rock, like, the depression just got deeper. And leaving Standing Rock and trying to go back on tour after I left Standing Rock, it was like my PTSD was kicking in. And I don't know, I watched a lot of like my heroes as a comedian, um see what they did during their depression. And it's never like, there's never really a good outcome, so I knew that I didn't want to go that far. Like, I needed to pull myself out of this depression. I needed to figure out what I want to do. And so I made the decision to pull back from stand-up comedy, and allow myself to continue storytelling in a different way. So that's when I started screenwriting and started writing scripts, and then I started to direct my films. And just the whole journey from that depression it has changed my life. And I mean, to this day, this is kind of like I guess, an insensitive way to say it, but I'm talking about myself, is like, I'm kind of glad that depression happened, because it changed me for the better. Like, I grew so much, just to stop what I was doing, to take a step back and learn where I wanted to go and learn how I wanted to feel while continuing to work. Um, and and throughout this whole process, like, now I'm working more behind the cameras and writing. Like, I'm still learning more about myself during my transformation. And like, let's say, for example, something that I learned about myself was I wanted to write a script about my childhood in the Central District in Seattle. And in order for me to, so the Central District it's a historically Black neighborhood. And right now it's definitely like going through a whole gentrification process. And I have I have some very specific memories growing up, like, in that neighborhood as a child. And I wanted to be able to write about those memories. I wanted to be able to create stories from these memories. But in order for me to create something as powerful or as beautiful as I want it to be, I have to be able to like put myself back into traumatic spaces that like trigger my depression. Because yeah, I have a thing about writing stuff that's gonna make people like, even though, all right, even though I'm a comedian, I have a thing about writing stuff that's gonna make people cry. And in order for me to do that, I have to be able to cry. I have to be able to write out my emotions, and in order to write them out, I have to be in those emotions. So learning how to come from somebody who was like struggling with depression, and then go into like, now my workspace is okay, I need to go back into these emotions, and then learn also be able to pull myself out. So it's definitely like I'm learning so much just about myself as I still grow in this world of film and writing.
Thank you for that, Chad. It's again, it's spirit work, and it's ever transformative. And when people are courageous to go to those places of holding those complex emotional spaces, it also allows other people to know that it's okay, that they're not alone. So thank you. Alyssa, and I do recognize that we're about to go into a time of answering some audience questions, but I do want to recognize and share space with you, Alyssa, to answer this question, because I see you as just a bright light of transformation, and I just feel your power and vision for the industry responding differently, doing differently, being better. And I would love to hear some of your insights.
In terms of how to transform media and how I'm trying to be a part of that.
Yes.
Thank you.
I feel your power in doing that. So please do share.
Okay, so spirit. I had a really profound experience in 2017, in which actually the woman who connected Tracy and I, Jackie Jacobs, she's from the Lummi Nation. And my connection with Jackie is such that it comes into my life when something like something bigger than ourselves is intended to take place. And that journey started with, she did pageantry with Miss North Carolina back in the day. And so I grew up in Bothell, Washington. And when I was 18, she started coaching me through Seafair, Miss Eastside. But we always did it in terms of lifting up Indigenous communities and just using the platform to shine light on the vitality of Indigenous culture. That journey from 18 led to being Miss Alaska at 27, and using that platform of Miss USA to 3 million people through the pageant broadcast to make a statement that Indigenous people, we still are here. And we did that through a collaboration with Alaska Heritage Institute, which is my tribe's heritage preservation nonprofit, to have a gown that had the Eagle Killer Whale crest on it. What happened to me on stage when I was performing that gown was I kind of felt like carried forward, like an out of body, like spiritual experience. And even everything that transpired to even get to that point felt like larger than myself. And it was lovely to share it with someone like Jackie, who also was tuned into that plane. And from there, it just flowed into knowing that continuing to use platforms that are not traditionally inhabited by Indigenous people, whether it's pageants or Hollywood, was what I felt compelled to continue to do. And when I lean into that, it seems to flow. And an example of that is, it happened to be that the people who I met through Miss Alaska, such as being like an ambassador for the Women's Alaska Heart Association. One of those women was, the VP of Alaska Airlines for Alaska. So that's why a culture story will have Culture Stories Alaska, which is the only content on Alaska Airlines that in her words substantiates why there's a Nupiaq person on the plane. And that also led to helping to plan an Indigenous Filmmakers Lounge at Sundance. And now this is coming up in January. That's the second time we have it in person, thanks to COVID. But that led to then Culture Story getting to have that series published through PBS, through FNX. And it's flowed because when I have leaned into those times where something has felt larger than myself, that it tends to work. And so I guess I'm just trying to explain to folks that there's spirit guides your path, and flow state is real, and doing things that are meaningful is when it's not just about you, it's about something about uplifting your community and making a statement and a message in platforms that are larger than yourself. So in summary, Tracy, how am I making change and transformation? I mean, we all know that media and television has not been a space that has had a lot of Indigenous voices in it, and it's people like Chad who are writing for Res Dogs, and everyone else in this call who are starting to create that media that is getting the rest of the world more familiar with our stories and who we are today. But that's just what I'm most passionate about, is getting our narratives back into those spaces that we haven't been able to claim space, whether it's pageants or Hollywood.
Thank you. That makes me think about, we're in this amazing moment of time where people are really excited and interested in hearing from Indigenous people, seeing Indigenous made contents, understanding better Indigenous communities. And you're all a part of that fabric that's growing. And in our comments, I see some shout outs to some people who've been, integral in, building part of this experience that we're having today as the industry shifting. And one of the questions really is centered on the Sundance program, and acknowledging that people like Taika and Sterling and many others have, found their beginning there. What programs, in your experience, would you all maybe give space to or voice to that have supported you, or that you see are supporting Indigenous voices in this moment? How can people begin looking for resources?
Well, Neotero is not a bad place to start. But also, I think growing up, I didn't really know anyone who was doing this. I knew one person, and Tracy, you know this person too. So it was difficult for me to grasp tangibly how to do this, how to storytell through through video, through film, on screen. Just a few, I guess, tangible organizations. If you're especially Indigenous Pasifika, the Asian American Journalists Association, which also covers Pacific Islander students and up and coming video journalists and filmmakers and documentarians. I'm also one of the co-leads for the Pacific Islander Journalism Task Force, which is under that. You can find us online and as well. And we actually have some really exciting programs coming up with trainings and funding and scholarships. The Native American Journalists Association, without a doubt, one of the best associations out there that does support everyone at every level. And then lastly, something that I'm getting acquainted with is NPR's Next Gen Radio as well. And so if you're looking for collaborations there, you can look to as well. I also do want to encourage, as someone who is obsessed with local news and came back to local news and moved away from cities to come back to this type of environment. I do also encourage you to reach out to your smaller media companies where you're at. Whether that's a television station or an independent production company. you never know if the diner that you go to every day is right next to the production company that could help you get your first foot in the door. So those are just a few of my suggestions. But without a doubt, Neotero has changed my life, as I'm sure it has for many others who've been touched by it. So no shortage of resources there.
Thanks, Tomas. I do want to give a shout out real quick to Vision Maker Media and Pick, who've also been popping up in the comments. They are incredible resources. Chad, love to hear from you. And just acknowledging we have 4 minutes left, so maybe a quick 1 minute each.
Yeah, I would say Vision Maker. Vision Maker is definitely a good place to if you wanna get into this world or continue to like build on your work. Vision Maker is definitely a good place to start, as well as, let's say, Imaginative really helped me as well, and Neotero. And yeah, I've had some really great opportunities to work with each of these organizations to help build my career. And they all set you up with really great mentors and just a great community to work with. So.
Thank you, Alyssa.
I started making a list of the Native Media Group has been very helpful to me. They also put on LA Skins Fest, which is actually happening right now. I've also received certain grants from like the Potlatch Fund out of Seattle. I'm currently the host of Native America Calling through Quantic Broadcast Corporation, and they're always investing in Indigenous storytellers who want to create content because they need it for their channels, such as Native Voice One. And what else did I write down? Going directly to Native corporations and Native heritage organizations. They tend to want to support up and coming Indigenous storytellers. And I've also had success just DMing on Instagram people like those of us here on the panel. I think we all really want to help each other. If you DM'd me, I'm on Instagram, Alyssa K. London. I would make time for you if you wanted to talk about the field. So thank you.
Thank you. Dakota.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the local level piece that Thomas was saying, just like connecting with your community, like getting your family to have your back, like knowing who your people are in your area. That's really helped me. Of course, I feel like there's so many programs now that didn't exist like 5 years ago, or maybe even 3 years ago. I'm thinking about the First Nations Performing Arts, FINIPA. There's the Native Launchpad at the Western Arts Alliance. There's the First Peoples Fund, there's First Nations, there's Indian Collective. There's like all these kind of different funding opportunities. And I also want to say, like, let's go after the funding that's not just for Indigenous peoples, and that's why I'm like that, get your people behind you. I feel like a lot of the support that I'm getting is from folks who are offering me, I've known for like 10 or 15 years, and they're like, hey, can you come and do this? And I just say yes. And that's been helpful because as I'm going after funding that's not just for Indigenous peoples, I feel like I've been successful because the people that hold me down, because my community has got my back, and I know it, and I'm rooting my work there. So yeah, let's go get all that money, and let's make Indigenous money.
Thank you. And real quick, PIC is Pacific Islanders and Communications. So I just wanted to re-shout that out because they've been amazing partners in all of this work. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your lived experience, your life experience. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, one thing I forgot to say was that the reason why having your people to have your back is so important to me is because as we move into these other opportunities, there can be pressure to assimilate and to do things in non-Indigenous ways that we would in our communities. it's really important that we don't ever do that. Not because that would make us bad, but because there's more possibility that opens up when we move in our ancestral life ways, because we can move beyond the boundaries of our own imagination. And so, yeah, let's go get that money, but let's not replicate what doesn't work. You know, let's get that money and make it of service to our communities.
Thank you for that.
Also, people's projects are coming to them over and over again. That's really like spirit talking to them. And so when you lean into that, instead of questioning why you feel compelled to do that, just lean into like, oh, that's what my purpose is. And then when you are conveying your purpose to other people, it's almost like this contract that they need to have with you to help make it happen. And that kind of leads to funding and other opportunities coming when you're leaning into your purpose.
Thank you. I feel like we could have been doing this for another hour easy. I think we got through one formal question because you all have such beauty and such power in sharing stories. So that just tells me more to come, more opportunities, more time to talk story and share. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Hawaii International Film Festival. Thank you, Kin Theory team, for bringing us into this space. And I can't say enough about just having the opportunity to be part of this journey with you all. Thank you.
On behalf of HIF, we all really appreciate Neotero. For more info on Neotero, go to neotero.org. All of you are so incredible, and I can't thank you enough for sharing your time and perspectives with us. I know our community here in Hawaii and abroad will find so much value out of everything that was discussed. And I really encourage everyone to check out the Kin Theory database. I think amazing things are going to come of that in the future. Kintheory.org. So mahalo nui loa. We really appreciate all of your work. Please don't stop. Continue creating, and check us out at hif.org. Aloha. Aloha. Thank you all.
Thank you.